Minnesota at Iowa, Sunday college basketball. Who do you like and why?
Well, RJ, I like Minnesota in this game, and this is another case where we're going to discuss people are going to handicap with their eyes and how it can be very misleading to you. It'll send you down the road many times. It's going to have you in the poorhouse, and we're going to talk about it in this game.
All right, so what are the people seeing?
What people are seeing is they're looking at an Iowa team that beat two very bad teams, and then in their last game played Wisconsin and took Wisconsin to the limit. So now all of a sudden you got a team win two in a row, then a very good-looking loss. Oh, this Iowa team's turned the corner. No, they haven't. The key point is that Wisconsin game, that was an absolute stone-cold look-ahead game for Wisconsin because Wisconsin on Saturday, we're taping on Friday, on Saturday plays the number one team in the country, and they weren't looking at Iowa last night or Wednesday when they played.
All right,
They
so
were
let's
looking
talk
ahead.
about this. So this is one of the recurring themes with you, is when you can identify a game that was deceiving, that there's a misperception because of a situation people are not accounting for, then you can take advantage of the misperception. It's like if you're hiring someone to do your marketing and you see that they actually were hired by Google and you're thinking, well, heck, I can get someone that Google wanted. But then if it wasn't true that they actually were, let's say, working at Google as a custodian, that's a misperception. So what you're saying is people are going to overreact to Iowa seemingly playing so well against Wisconsin, but you're saying Wisconsin was in such a severe look ahead, there was a misperception about what kind of quality win that was or quality game that was, and thus now they're overvalued.
Absolutely.
All right, that makes a ton of sense. That's one piece to the puzzle. What else?
Well, the second piece of the puzzle is they're going to look at Minnesota. And what they're going to see with Minnesota is a team that's lost 4 games in a row. So the public's going to say, well, one team's declining, the other team's ascending. This is a perfect storm.
So is Minnesota declining?
Minnesota, if you look at, and again, I'm a guy that goes back and re-engineers the schedule to try to see the mindset and what happened.
Find the situations, the misperceptions.
And in this, it is, absolutely. What happened is they lost to Purdue, which is, in my opinion, the second best team in the Big Ten. After that, they played, the next game was their look-ahead game to Ohio State. So they had a poor performance after Purdue, which was a sandwich game, and then they had Ohio State. So you had a bad spot there. They lost to Ohio State on national TV, and then they came up last night, and I actually talked about this game on...
So let me jump in, because I'm just saying, I try to sit in as the audience here. When you start going on, your mind, it's like hearing Durr talk about poker, is sometimes you hear Durr talking, it makes no sense to the average player. When you start rounding off 4 games, I start to kind of get dizzy. I mean, all joking aside, I'm not following you. So amongst these games, give me the 1 or 2 key points of where the misperception are.
They lost 4 games, but they played 2 very good teams that they were high for, and then you had the game sandwiched in between those 2 is they were looking ahead and then the hangover afterwards.
How can you look ahead when you're losing game after game?
Well, you start with Purdue. The first game was Purdue. They were high as a kite to play Purdue.
And how'd they do?
They lost. So
that means something, right? If they're max motivation and they lose.
You're high to beat one of the upper echelon teams, and then when you lose, you have a carryover effect many times after that game. What compounded that second game is the third game in this 4-game stretch was Ohio State up next. So it was a bad spot for Minnesota.
So they were high, they were in a sandwich spot, then they were high again, and how'd they do against Ohio State?
They lost.
But yeah, clearly, Ohio State's undefeated. But what, did they cover?
No, they got beat by double digits.
All right. So and then the fourth game.
The fourth game they played against Illinois last night, and we're taping on Friday. I talked about this very concept with Mike and Dan on their podcast Thursday. As I said, be careful that this is a trap situation. Everybody is going to look for Minnesota to bounce back now that they're stepping so far down in class because Illinois had been playing bad. The line came out only 1, and the public jumped all over Minnesota, and it went to 2. It was a trap game to me. I said they're going to have one more bad game carryover. They did. Now they're going out on the road.
And this was, in theory, this was a carryover from Ohio State.
The hangover effect, dropping down in class, because the line, again, it was one of those things with the line. If the
See, I got to tell you, this one feels like one of your kind of, with hindsight kind of things. Because it seems to me that they've lost 4 straight games. And then if you wanted to make the case against Minnesota now, that potentially, and you can go head to head on this, Dustin, perhaps, is potentially, in that case, you'd say, well, listen, this team is turning around in from Thursday to Sunday, so it's a fairly quick turnaround. They've just gotten beat 4 times. They're questioning themselves. In fact, I'm making this point right now. They're all wondering, we're not going to make the tournament. Where's the motivation? Now they're on the road. They don't want to travel to Iowa in the middle of winter. Where's the motivation at? If you were looking at it in the next game, you could say, and doesn't it make sense after 4 losses in a row that they really weren't focused? So you have not made a case to me. Now, you might be right. I was overrated, and maybe that's half enough, and maybe Minnesota's properly rated. But really, can we agree that in the last 4 games, this team is underperformed?
See, they've underperformed, but to me, for all of the angles that I said, and I like what you said because to me, that's exactly the way John Q. Public would think. So I like that. But this is the situation.
Now, I also think Jessica Alba was good looking. Am I wrong about that, too?
No, you're not wrong about that.
Because usually things that are obvious aren't always wrong.
They're not always. But in the betting world, more often than not, I really do believe that when things look that obvious.
So maybe you're making another case, though. Maybe you're saying the same. In the prior video, you said, listen, there's these 2 teams, and the public perception is simply wrong on both. Mm-hmm. Okay? And that you're right, that one team had won some, and you said, okay, they won, they look good, but they're not quite that good. You're right, these have been good performances. No excuses, nothing to take away from that. It's just people are overreacting to it. And then with the underdog, you're saying, or the bad team, you were saying, people are overreacting to how bad they are. Maybe say that about Minnesota. Listen, this Minnesota team's not near as good as I thought they were. There's no excuse for these 4 straight losses, but people are going to overreact to it. But don't say because of the hangover this and hangover that.
Well, I see where you're going with that, and I can agree with that. Here's where I'll say we're going to get value with Minnesota today because of those 4 games. And if I am correct in my thinking, this is the game where you will get a true performance from Minnesota going back out on the road. They don't have any excuses anymore. They had their 2 slaps in the face from Purdue and Ohio State, and then they had their 2 letdown games afterwards. This is where they have to get back on track, and if they don't, then I'm going to lose. I'm going to really adjust my stock on them. But we're getting value with them because they're down in the market, and Iowa falsely is getting better value.
So really, just to drill down, and that makes a ton of sense, is there's 2 different ways that a team can be misvalued. One is there can just be an overreaction to the truth, or there can be a misperception. And what I think we're saying here is I think perhaps there is a slight overreaction to the truth that Minnesota is just not as good as people thought. You're saying because of that convoluted scheduling you were talking about, that maybe even there's not only an overreaction but a slight misperception. With Iowa, I totally agree with you. There's both a misperception and an overreaction. So if you've got 3 components of value, meaning 2 misperceptions on the Iowa side, and even if you only have 1 on the Minnesota side, 3 components of misperception probably adds up to enough to offer value.
Absolutely. I'm projecting the line will come out somewhere around Minnesota -3. I like Minnesota, and I'll be honest with you.
Minnesota as a home or as a road favorite?
As a road favorite. This was the runner-up to the best bet. Tennessee is definitely the best bet, but this was the runner-up. I like Minnesota a lot here.
And you're projecting?
71-63 Minnesota.
Okay, so since the line's not out, let's talk about parameters. And you actually, most people would say I like it -3.5 or better or whatever. You actually going to have parameters on both sides because you don't want it to look too good. Yeah. So give us your parameters.
Well, if this game would come out that Minnesota was 1.5 or less, it would make me...
so you like Minnesota from -1.5 up to what?
I like Minnesota from -2 all the way up to 6.
-2 all the way up to 6.
Yep.
All right. It's your turn to continue the conversation in the comment section with Marco and me. Oh, well, I got to remember, we've been doing this where I'm going to say that I'm going to say, you like Minnesota? All right, I'm going to say yes, I like this one. So I went 3 neutrals, and
Stomach just
then I'm
cringed.
going to agree.
All right, I got RJ's blessing. Just as long as I don't have to kiss any rings or anything, for the.
It is platinum. All right, now, guys, remember, Marco's going to be coming in twice a week now with the new studio. So we'll be back Tuesday night talking Wednesday and Thursday games with Marco.